All right, what is going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Very Cold Lasagna, the podcast that houses a safe and open listening platform for casual, cold, and even the dumbest takes from the world of WWE, AEW, the NFL, and the wide world of pro wrestling and sports in general. I'm your host, DylanLasagna. Welcome to today's episode number 71 of this freezing cold podcast that is in the very cold fridge that also houses that very cold yet spicy as hell lasagna. Anyway, it is time to talk again about my San Francisco 49ers. And it's another week, and it was a nice one to bat as they had their Week 14 matchup, a must-win game as well against the Cincinnati Bengals. And Cincinnati, that good old Cincinnati. It was a must-win game for the 49ers to keep their playoff hopes alive, as well as Cincinnati too, because they need to keep their playoff hopes in their conference as well. We're going to be talking about that game, my winners and losers for the 49ers side, my takeaways from that game for the red and gold, and we're going to be previewing their Week 15 matchup against the Atlanta Falcons. And before we do, make sure you listen to the show however you can and wherever you can, whether it's on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Anchor FM, Google Podcasts, any way you can. If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you hit the like button, hit the subscribe, turn on that notification bell so you'll be listening and following the show however you can. Make sure you follow the show on social media, on Twitter and Instagram at Very Cold Lasagna. So let's talk about this game between the 49ers and the Bengals, mind you. Their Week 14 matchup. It was a must-win game for both teams. Both teams were coming off really bad losses the week before in Week 13. For the Niners, they were coming off a loss in a game that they should have won against a 4-8, now 5-8 Seattle Seahawks team, 23-30, which saw Jimmy G perform pretty badly. He had 2 interceptions, and those 2 interceptions were pretty key into the Seahawks beating them at their own game of, run first, control the clock. That approach by Kyle Shanahan, that kind of offense that he wanted to run, and Pete Carroll and the Hawks beat them at it in Week 13. Meanwhile, for the Bengals, they nearly came back in a game where they pretty much had a lot of self-induced mistakes in a game that they could have won against the LA Chargers, but those mistakes that I just mentioned, and as well as a finger injury to Joe Burrow, ended up for them, they ended up getting smoked by Justin Herbert and those Chargers 41-22 in that same week. So both teams had their playoff chances take a kind of like a minor hit, but this was a game where both teams needed to win. And for the Bengals, they saw the Ravens lose their matchup against the Cleveland Browns, and the Ravens also lost Lamar Jackson in that game, at least temporarily, to a low ankle sprain. And this was an opportunity for them. If they were going to win this game, they could take sole possession of first place in the AFC North, because they already won the first matchup back in week 9, where they beat the Ravens. But either way, this was an opportunity for them to clinch first place in their division. Meanwhile, for the 49ers, they just needed to get a bounce back win and, reclaim that 6th seed that they lost to Washington. And fortunately for them, the football team had already lost earlier in the day to the Dallas Cowboys, where Taylor Heineke just got beaten up by that Dallas front 7. So it was going to be a must-win and desperate game for both teams. The Niners weren't going to have Emmanuel Mosley on the defensive end and running back Elijah Mitchell on the offensive end, but they were getting 2 important pieces back for this game, and that was receiver Deebo Samuel and linebacker Fred Warner. So even though they lost them, they got some back. So all in all, they were heading into this one, I'd say 50-50 in terms of who they were going to have. So we get to the start of this game, Niners get the ball first, and here we are from the get-go already. It was kind of like the same theme from last week. Kyle Shanahan is try to control the clock with this run first approach, but then obviously right out of the gate it doesn't work. And 2 plays later into their opening drive, Jimmy G typically took a sack after 2 failed runs by Jeff Wilson Jr. So the Niners had the punt, and lo and behold, from there you would see Jimmy G having to take more control of the offense. But more on that later. So the front 7 made their presence felt early and often. Linebackers Fred Warner and Azeez Al-Shaair, they put the early heat on Joe Burrow and Joe Mixon. They forced the Bengals to punt early in their possession, and even though the Bengals were able to stall the Niners offense again, and I was just like, why? The Bengals went to full-on Bungles mode as they were having a lot of special teams miscues in this one, and it started here in the first quarter. Some dude, their punt returner, he muffed a punt, and the Bengals gave the Niners another chance on offense, and even though they couldn't fully capitalize on it, they turned it into a 3-0 lead midway through the first quarter. And these special teams issues continued for the Bungles. They even on the ensuing kickoff, even though they recovered it, the kick returner muffed it again. I'm like, dude, did you eat too much Butterfinger? Did you eat too much? Those sweets, those nice candies, before the game. What is it with receivers or with players eating Butterfinger, before games? It's not what you should be doing before games, guys. Come on now. So the secondary gave up a couple of big plays against the Bungles in this drive, but the front 7 forced another fumble on Joe Burrow, and they stalled their offense enough to have them settle for a field goal. So it's all tied up, three apiece. And I was thinking, early in the game, the defense, the secondary is not bending and it's not breaking, but it's giving up big plays, sure. But, they're doing a good job so far of, getting to Joe Burrow and, doing just enough to contain them, to keep them in check. So towards the end of the first quarter, the running game begins to pick up steam thanks to that offensive line, even especially the left side. The right side, not so much, because they eventually began to give later on in the game. But either way, Jeff Wilson and Deebo Samuel managed to get a lot of running room thanks to the offensive line. And Deebo knotted a 27-yard touchdown. Niners went up 10-3 early in the second quarter. And that defensive line on the next possession, on the next drive for the Bengals, they continued to impress. They forced Joe Burrow to run out of bounds, third down. And they were putting a lot of heat on him throughout this game. And, there was a lot of good things to like about this defensive front. Even though the Niners punted again, as they often did in this one, the Bengals, they initially turned it over too. I thought the Niners would have gotten an interception at midfield, but problem was Ambry Thomas, the third round pick from April, he was flagged for hands to the face. And keep in mind, this was his first meaningful game, meaningful action since ever, for the first time in forever. So this would be a very common theme for Thomas. So yeah, let's keep that in mind. The Bengals drove deep down into the Niners red zone, but the defense again held serve. They forced another field goal. So the defense playing big once again and only forcing 3 points from the Bengals. Special teams for the Bengals, continue to be an issue again. It continued to bite them in the ass. After the Niners had the punt, special teams got Butterfingers all over their ass. They muffed another punt. The Niners recovered it. And this time around, the Niners converted it into a touchdown. Jimmy G found George Kittle into the end zone and put them up 17-6 into halftime. And I gotta say, I was a little impressed with what I've seen so far from these Niners. After a slow couple of minutes, the Bengals went full on bungles. They were bungling this game away, and the Niners took full advantage of it. They netted 17 points off those special teams miscues, even though like 3 of those miscues the Niners actually recovered, but still, they were pretty much attacking them aggressively, and that's exactly what you're supposed to be doing. Jimmy G, despite some miscues, he actually looked pretty all right. And when he really got George Kittle involved, when he threw it to him like for a good chunk of this first half, they proved to be a good 1-2 combo. And the defensive line, they really impressed me here. I think they were the big people that stepped up in this one, because they put the heat. They really put the heat on Joe Burrow. They really limited it. They limited him in this portion of the game. So hopefully they weren't going to let up. They were going to continue to add on in the second half. And that momentum from the first half, it carried over. It carried over into the third quarter. The Bengals, they oddly decided to go 3 and out via 3 consecutive runs. This is something that the Niners would typically do in their opening drives. And oddly, the Bengals decided to take a little page out of our handbook and go for 3 consecutive runs. And that was weird. Very, very weird. Meanwhile, Jimmy G, he actually continued to run the offense with succession. But problem was when the Niners actually got to the red zone, midway through the third quarter, I don't know why Jimmy didn't throw it to a wide open Kyle Juszczyk. Like, he had him wide open. Instead of going to him, instead of throwing the ball to him, he instead tried to look for the tight window. I think it was Trent Sherfield or George Kittle. Tried to fit that window into, and he went for that. He also could have gotten intercepted if he threw it like earlier than into that tight window. Like, dude, you had a touchdown that could have sealed that game. Like, instead, we had to settle for 3. 20-6, but still, it could have been more than that. So the Bengals pretty much spent the rest of the third quarter trying to make their way back to the field. And once they got back to the Niners red zone, Joe Burrow got sacked by Samson Ibuka and Arden Key. And things only got worse for the Bengals because their kicker, Eric McPherson, completely missed the field goal attempt. So when you saw that, the Bengals, things were just not going right for them. And, for the Niners, even though they couldn't really take advantage of their opportunities in the third quarter, you thought at this point, things might end up in the Niners' favor heading into the fourth quarter. There was just one problem. For the Niners. The ghosts of Super Bowl past came back to bite them here. And what I mean by that is, they started to play a little too conservative here. They ran it on first and second down, and then when they didn't get the first down on second down, they decided to throw it on third down. And when they tried to throw it on third down, let's say the garbage from Jimmy G reared its ugly head, and he took some needless sacks that gave the Bengals possession when the Niners had to punt. So when the Niners had to punt all throughout the fourth quarter, at least for most of it, the terribleness of the secondary also reared its ugly head. They started to give up big plays to T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, who managed to get a wide open 4th and 5 touchdown to cut the deficit to 20-13. And keep in mind, Ambry Thomas was just getting bullied in this game. He was just getting burnt like Jim Ross's barbecue. He was getting burnt like barbecue chicken. So anyway, much later in the game, the Niners offense still can't get anything going. They're still trying to play, conservative football for whatever reason. Joe Burrow led a 2-minute drill that led to a lob bomb touchdown to Jamar Chase to tie the game. And it also saw Ambry Thomas get burnt again. So the Niners still had a lot of time. They had like over a minute left to, push this downfield and, get in Robbie Gould's range to get the game winner. So they got in his range, and also saw Jimmy G connect with George Kittle, get for a badass. It was a really good catch for Kittle. The problem was it was all for naught because Robbie Gould missed the field goal wide right. He pushed it wide right. It's like this dude, I think he just got an extension last summer, and he's doing this stuff. You can't be doing this kind of thing. You can't be like missing these clutch kicks in the biggest of moments. Like, you got to win these games, man. You got to win these games if it calls upon you. So the game goes into overtime, and the Bengals get the ball first because they won the coin toss. And Nick Bosa, man, he has been having himself a game. He's had, I think, 2 of the 5 sacks on Joe Burrow, or 3 if I'm getting this right. But he was one of the main factors in this game. He, once again, on third down, when the Niners and the Bengals were in the red zone, in the red zone, when the Bengals were in scoring position, Nick Bosa sacked Joe Burrow again, and the Bengals had to settle for a field goal. Nick Bosa just saved the Niners from losing in that situation. Now it was up to the 49ers to march back down to the field, finish the game, and win it. And in a slow and methodical push, that's what they did. They made their way back to the red zone, and after the 2-minute warning, Jimmy G sidearmed a pass to Brandon Aiyuk, and he ran it down the sideline and reached for the pylon. It was initially ruled a yard short by the officials, but they overturned it and gave the Niners a victory, 26-20. And wow, that was a game. That was an insane game. It was insane. So, for as crazy as this game was, and it shouldn't have been, because there was like a big missed opportunity from Jimmy G to give it to Kyle Juszczyk that would have ended the game earlier in the third quarter. I gotta say, this was one of the better wins by the 49ers. A really good bounce back win. The Bengals committed their own mistakes on special teams in the first half, and the Niners could have taken a bigger advantage of it, had they recovered some the other 2 fumbles that the Bengals did on special teams. This could have gotten out of hand for the Bengals and more in favor for the Niners really quick. This could have been a blowout in favor of the Niners. But still, it was a 17-6 halftime lead. And like I said, had Jimmy G found Kyle Juszczyk wide open in the end zone, I mean, he was like literally right there, the game could have been over by then. And when the offense started to get conservative, when Kyle Shanahan started to, go back to the well of Super Bowl mistakes, it started to cause problems for not just his offense, but for the secondary. It caused the secondary to go back into their usual terrible behavior of not being able to cover opposing receivers. And it was just allowed them to come back, and it was just like something that didn't need to happen. But nonetheless, the Niners managed to limit the Bengals when it came to overtime, and it let themselves get back in the game and win it when it mattered most. So it was a big bounce back for the Niners, who needed it to stay in the playoff race, which is pretty wild. It is pretty wild, but still, it is also kind of a backdoor behind the Rams at this point. And for the moment, they currently sit as the 6th seed. They overtaken Washington for the most part. Now it's on to taking care of their own business in the division. I think they have one more AFC game in the Tennessee Titans after the Falcons, but they also have the Texans. But yeah, you get my drift. But overall, this was a good victory. This was a good victory for the Niners, and for as much as I'm pretty against their delusional playoff hopes, because it's pretty much the back door into getting whooped in the first round. Hey, this was a good win. This was a good win for the Niners against a Bengals team that was also needy for a win. Now it's first from the winners and losers of Week 14 for the 49ers. George Kittle. The more you involve him, the more he plays like an absolute beast. And Kyle Shanahan should have been having him been involved in the passing game since the very beginning. I don't know why they've been trying to use him as a blocker for the early portions of the season, but this is how they should have been using it all season long. Kyle Shanahan knows that Jimmy G and George Kittle have undeniable chemistry. For as inconsistent as Jimmy G is as a quarterback, there's no denying that Jimmy G and George Kittle have great chemistry. I'll give Jimmy G that. So I will say that when Jimmy G connects with George Kittle, he's unstoppable. George Kittle is unstoppable. So I guess the Niners are just gonna have to feed Kittle a lot more if they want to make that delusional playoff run. Brandon Aiyuk, his reemergence in the offense continued on Sunday. He got a season high in targets, and he's gained more catches, and he's been doing so well, with his routes, getting past defenders, as I've been saying for weeks now. And since Deebo Samuel's been hurt, or he's been kind of like going into that hybrid of wide receiver and running back, Aiyuk has been stepping up as one of the top receivers in this team. And, he's continuing to mold himself as a top guy in San Francisco. And hopefully that continues towards the rest of the season. The Niners defensive line, their pass rush was excellent on Sunday. It was probably their best game of the season. They sacked Joe Burrow 5 times. They pressured him all game long. This is honestly, I think this was one of my keys to victory from last week. And Nick Bosa netted 2 of those 5 sacks. He was one of the instrumental pieces in making Burrow rattled all game long. So even though the secondary remains much of an issue, the defensive line under defensive coordinator DeMeco Ryans continues to get better. And it'll continue to get better as they stay healthy and they get more games in. Now as for some of the losers, corner Ambry Thomas, I get it. Thomas was thrown into the fire because Emmanuel Mosley was out with injury. And I think my kind of gripe with Thomas starting now is that he should have been at least been in the rotation all throughout the season. He shouldn't have been starting, but he should have been rotated in and out with Mosley and Norman and other guy and whoever else was in there, because even though he wasn't deemed as ready by DeMeco Ryans or Kyle Shanahan, you should have at least gave him a little bit of playing time, because how is he gonna get any kind of experience when unless if you want to burn him like barbecue chicken. So this game kind of exposed his lack of an NFL playing experience big time here, because against one of the best receivers this season in Jamar Chase, he got burnt. He got burnt to a crisp like Jim Ross's good old barbecue and Shaquille O'Neal's barbecue chicken. And that included the game-time touchdown. So, I'm not going to roast on him too hard because hopefully he'll learn and, grow from this first game. And hopefully he'll get some more meaningful action going forward. Robbie Gould, unlike previous seasons, he's been not as good as Gould. And it really showed in this one. He's been missing pretty makeable field goals and extra points all season long. And in a clutch situation like the one that was presented towards the end of this game on Sunday, he pooped his big point pants. He really did. He's getting paid too much to fail in situations like this one. He could have prevented overtime, but he pushed it wide right. I'm not sure how he did it or what caused it, but he's getting paid too much to fail in clutch situations. So either way, it's been not a good season for the Niners veteran kicker. So some takeaways from this game, the Niners get a win. They got a win with Jimmy G, not in spite of Jimmy G, or not because of any other factors. It is because of Jimmy G. They actually got a win because of Jimmy G. So when they didn't have the run heavy approach that they often relied on because Elijah Mitchell was out and Jeff Wilson Jr. was playing hurt. So Kyle Shanahan, as I said for the last couple of weeks, eventually he had to turn to Jimmy G. He had to turn to Jimmy Garoppolo to run this offense, even though obviously he didn't trust him. But unlike the last couple of weeks, or unlike the other instances, he actually led the team to victory. I mean, sure, he had a couple of bad throws and some bad mistakes, bad reads, and he even almost threw a pick six towards the end of the game, at least the end of regulation. But, this was still one of his better games. And if Shanahan trusted Jimmy G a little bit more and Jimmy G played like he did on Sunday and in the early portions of 2018 and, when he came to San Francisco in 2017, the Niners would actually be a very decent team outside of the secondary than the ones we saw during the midseason where they're just pooping all over the place. And I'll say this, Nick Bosa is comeback player of the year. he should be nominated for comeback player of the year. He's having himself a big year coming off that ACL injury a year ago. He's having himself multi-game sacks. He's helping the defensive line create pressure up front. He's always a force to be reckoned with. So hopefully he gets nominated for comeback player of the year. And then lastly, the Niners, at least for this game, they saved their delusional playoff hopes with this win, and they get some help too. The Niners win over the Cincinnati Bengals. It helped them. It helped them in a big way in their crazy push for a backdoor entrance into the NFC playoffs. And it also helped them because Washington already lost to the Cowboys earlier in the day, and that helped their cause for the 49ers to reclaim their 6th seed from the football team. But even then, if the Niners want to make that backdoor entrance into the playoffs, they got to take care of the business, starting with the Falcons and then the Titans, the Texans, and an all-important matchup at the end of the season against the Rams. And obviously, they have to have some cards fall into place for them to get their one-way ticket into the postseason. So those are just my thoughts on this Week 14 matchup against the Cincinnati Bengals. A good win at that. Now, can they carry that momentum heading into Week 15 and beyond? We'll see. Hopefully they will. So speaking of Week 15, the Niners' next matchup, let's talk about it. Let's talk about their next matchup in Week 15 against the Atlanta Falcons. So going into this matchup between two teams that are still somehow in the playoff picture, both teams won their matchups in Week 14. The Falcons beat the Carolina Panthers 29-21, but don't let that box score, don't let that final score fool you, because the score was actually a little less reflective than what actually happened. The Falcons actually had this game very well in hand. They're actually up at one point 29-14 at one point, and then all throughout this game, Cam Newton was just the gift that kept on giving for the Falcons defense, and that included a pick six. And Cam Newton was just proving to the world that he's washed as hell. He is washed as hell. He's making self-induced sacks. He is fumbling the ball. This is a game. This is a Cam Newton showcase right here. I mean, that's not to say that the offense for the Falcons, didn't do anything, but it was more so the Panthers being bad on offense than it was the Falcons doing anything in this game. Meanwhile, for the Niners, obviously, they bounced back from that Week 13 loss to Seattle by outlasting the Bengals in overtime. Niners actually had that game in hand, but had they not been conservative in the fourth quarter and allowing the Bengals to come back, they would have won the game decisively. But nonetheless, they outlasted the Bengals 26-20. Brandon Aiyuk scored the game-winning touchdown by reaching for the pylon and scoring that bad boy in to notch the victory to net themselves at 8-6. So the Falcons so far during the season, for all it's worth, they're 6-7, and just like a bunch of other teams, they're still very much alive in the playoff race. They're in the crowded mess that is called the NFC Wild Card picture. Under first-year head coach and former Tennessee Titans offensive coordinator Arthur Smith, the Falcons they've been a very hit-and-miss team. They're not sure if they want to, they want to compete or if they want to rebuild. They're kind of like in that purgatory. They're not sure what to do. So even at 6-7, all of their wins have been one-score affairs against bottom-feeder teams like the Jets, the Dolphins, the Saints, and those teams that I just mentioned were not only one-score affairs, but teams like the Dolphins and the Saints were last-second game winners by their kicker Younghoe Koo. So other than that, they're 6-7 for a reason, because 3 of their 7 losses were blowout defeats at the hands of actual playoff contenders. The Bucs destroyed them, the Cowboys especially destroyed them, and the Patriots even blanked their asses. So their losses to those playoff teams exposed how limited this team really is, and how much the Falcons front office didn't really invest in putting together a competitive team, or even like considering whether or not they wanted to rebuild this past offseason. So Matt Ryan, he's still under center for Atlanta. He's still the QB. However, he doesn't have Julio Jones around to throw to anymore, because now he's in Tennessee. And he had Calvin Ridley for half a season, but the problem was for Calvin Ridley, he elected to take a mental health break for the rest of the season. It was initially temporarily, but it looking towards the rest of the season. But I mean, hey, your health comes first and foremost, and hopefully he does all well with it. So outside of Calvin Ridley though, and Matt Ryan, he barely has any help around him. He doesn't have an offensive line to speak of, and the other reliable weapon besides Calvin Ridley are running backs Cordell Patterson and Mike Davis, as well as the 4th overall pick, the tight end from Florida, Kyle Pitts, who honestly actually hasn't been that involved in recent weeks, and the often inconsistent Russell Gage. So the problem is, when those are your reliable guys and any of those guys are shut down by defenses, it's been proven that the Falcons can't move the ball without them. So like I said, their top receiving option, Calvin Ridley, he's been out since week 8 due to a non-football issue with, like I said, the mental health. And their defense for the Falcons, it's not particularly formidable. It's actually been pretty much the same for the last 3 years. Pretty bad, pretty so-so. They make plays every so occasionally, and they get burnt by elite talent. So they tend to give up a lot of big plays and a lot of points, especially against the cream of the crop, against the rest of the NFL. So in essence, the Falcons came into this season with subpar players on both sides of the ball. Again, this is a front office that wasn't sure whether they wanted to compete for a playoff spot or rebuild. They're not sure. So at 6-7, sure, there's some promising signs for head coach Arthur Smith for next year, but right now they don't resemble a contender, at least for this year. Like I said, recently they beat their division rival, the Carolina Panthers. They swept the season series 29-21, but again, that was a game where Cam Newton pretty much proved that he was washed as hell in that one by giving the gift that kept on giving, by handing out free sacks, free turnovers, a free pick six to the Falcons in that game. Meanwhile, for the 49ers, they entered this home matchup at 8-6. They currently sit as the 6th seed in the wild card race. They're coming off the heels of a heart-blood-inducing overtime victory over the Cincinnati Bengals in Week 14, 26-20. This is a game that they put on the heat on Joe Burrow, and Jimmy G actually had one of his best games with George Kittle. They went connection to connection. They actually were a good 1-2 punch in this game. And Brandon Aiyuk came in clutch with that game-winning touchdown in overtime. And the Niners, they finished their 2-game road trip, splitting it at 1 apiece, losing to Seattle and obviously winning in Cincinnati. But if they want to maintain their place in the playoff race, like I said, they currently sit at the 6th seed. They're going to have to win out. And these teams that they're going to be facing, 3 of the 4 teams that they're going to be facing, they're beatable. They're very beatable. Even on a short turnaround on Thursday night against the Tennessee Titans, it's pretty beatable. So they're going to have to win out. And once they get to the Week 18 matchup against the Rams, we'll see what happens from there. And they also have to hope that the other bottom feeders, like the Eagles and Washington, who are going to pretty much devour each other alongside the rest of the NFC East, will, they will feast on one another. The Saints, they're pretty much done. The Falcons, well, we face them, and we'll see what else happens from there. So they pretty much have to hope the others fall flat on their face. So some keys to the victory for both teams. For the Falcons, you got to pound the ball down the Niners' throats with their running back duo of Mike Davis and Cordell Patterson. The Niners did a good job of limiting Joe Mixon last week. Even though he got some good chunk plays, it was pretty much limiting them to 1 or 5 yarders for Joe Mixon. And the Niners did a good job of limiting that. Making Joe Burrow beat them through the air, try to beat them through the air. I think just like the Niners, the Falcons are also a run-heavy team. Because Matt Ryan just has a limited receiving core outside of Kyle Pitts. So Mike Davis and Cordell Patterson, I think Arthur Smith should lean a little bit heavier towards those two and pounce the ball on the Niners, because their run defense is pretty so-so. It's pretty so-so and kind of inconsistent at best. Kyle Pitts and Russell Gage, that little receiving tandem, they need to create separation against a bad Niners secondary. Like I said, time and time again, this Niners secondary is pretty bad. It is not good at all. Kyle Pitts is pretty talented. He's pretty good. Problem is, it's just like he doesn't do well. He hasn't been doing well in recent weeks, and actually for a good half of the season. And this could be a game for Pitts and Russell Gage to do well in, to do nicely in. But in order for them to do that, they need to burn the likes of Josh Norman or Ambry Thomas or Talona Hufanga. So in order for them to do that, they need to beat out those guys. And they have to create opportunities for Matt Ryan to do so. Now for the 49ers, Jimmy G has to be consistent. He has to carry over that positive momentum, that good performance he had against the Bengals, and do the same against the Falcons. He has to be real good in this game. Not the Jimmy G we saw in Week 13 against San Francisco, and we need to see the one that we saw last week against the Bengals. You can't have a repeat of 2 years ago. Remember 2 years ago when Jimmy G played lights out against the New Orleans Saints in that thriller of a matchup, and then the following week, the Niners just shit their pants. They were like pretty much, we're just not gonna play to our potential against a Falcons team that was pretty much all but done at that point, and they had Matt Ryan and Julio Jones and Calvin Ridley, and that's it. That was it in that game. So You can't have a repeat of 2 years ago where he just shit the bed. And then the secondary, they actually have to help out the pass rush, because the pass rush in the Cincinnati game, they were able to mask, at least for the most part, their issues. But the secondary actually needs to help them out against Atlanta's receivers. It's plain and simple. Our secondary is garbage. But the Falcons' offense is not that great either. And this is the Niners' chance before they head off to Tennessee on a Thursday night. This is the Niners' chance to get the secondary, some positive momentum. Have its corners and its safeties shadow, route to route the Falcons' receiving core, and this should be like preparation for a big Week 16 matchup against the Tennessee Titans. Otherwise, what are you here for? What are they here for? So, prediction-wise, this is going to be a desperation game for the Falcons, and it could be so for the 49ers. The Falcons are going to be very desperate in this one. They're going to be wanting to go 7-7, try to get back in that playoff race, try to overtake Washington for the 7th and final playoff spot. But unlike 2 years ago, where the Falcons actually managed to upset the 49ers because the Niners just decided to lay an egg in that one, the Falcons don't have the talent, especially on defense, to pull off the trap upset again. They really don't. So unless the Niners just want to overlook them again, they just want to be like, oh no, we're not going to play. We're too good for the likes of Atlanta. Expect them to take care of their business and get an important playoff tiebreaker as they improve to 8-6 and they fly off to Tennessee on a Thursday night. So, what do you guys think will happen in this Week 15 matchup against the Atlanta Falcons at home? Let me know how you feel. However you can. But that is it for this episode of Very Cold Lasagna, recapping the San Francisco 49ers again in their Week 14 victory over the Cincinnati Bengals, and talking about their Week 15 matchup against the Atlanta Falcons. Hopefully, they continue to build on this momentum heading into that delusional, crazy playoff run, that backdoor entrance into the playoffs. But sound off however you can in any way possible. Make sure to listen to the show on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Anchor FM, and Google Podcasts. Follow the show on social media, on Twitter and Instagram at Very Cold Lasagna. I am DylanLasagna, signing out of today's show. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for letting me into your homes, your phones, however it is, whatever you want to describe it as. But anyway, keep that lasagna very cold in the fridge with your takes on the world of pro wrestling and sports in general. Very cold in the fridge, inside that tasty, yet very cold and very frozen, but also spicy as hell lasagna. And until next time, peace out.